I've decided to mingle a couple of paintings together for today's project. And the two paintings that you see on the screen are my Seaside Poppies palette knife painting and a textured rock painting that I did. I have a YouTube video on both the Seascape Poppies painting and a rock wall painting, but the rock wall painting that I have a video of is done with earth tones rather than the shades of purple. And so if you would like to see those techniques done, I highly recommend watching those two movies. I really like the shades of purple that I have in this rock painting. I call it a rock painting because the surface is built up with my wall patch textures. And it ends up looking like pieces of amethyst stone actually rising up off of the surface. And I love those colors. They go really nicely in one of the rooms in my house. But I also like the palette knife poppies, and this particular painting hangs in my kitchen, and I would like to make one that goes in the other room that has the shades of purples and grays and blues in it. So I'm going to mingle those two together today. So this is all done with acrylic paints, which clean up with water, and I like that really well. And I use these little plastic palette knives. Someday perhaps I will invest in really good quality palette knives, but these work well for me, and I can get them in different sizes. For my background, I'll use a large flat brush. The brands I tend to use are Grumbacher and Golden, but there are other good brands out there as well. If I want dark colors, I use my raw umber. It's almost a black, but it's to the brown. Or I use my Payne's Gray, which is also very dark and can almost look black, but it is to the blue. So I'm keeping the colors in mind that I used in my amethyst rock painting, and I'm keeping the composition in mind that I used for my Seaside Poppies painting. So now I have all my colors ready. This is the ultramarine blue, that's the cobalt blue. And then I have my browns here, and my two shades of purple, a little bit of alizarin crimson, Titan Buff white. Titan Buff, by the way, is unbleached titanium white. And then this is my green gold, and that is my Payne's Gray. And I'm going to kind of follow the same type of thing that I did on my Seaside Poppies. I want the same type of feeling, I'm just using different colors. And so I kind of had a bit of a diagonal going on that painting, and I'm going to on this one as well. And I had basically three areas, and this is going to be more of my, I think, light tones, my lighter grays and lavenders, and then it'll go into a bit deeper tones here of the darker purples and things. And then down in here I'll get down into quite dark, and for that I can use Payne's Gray mixed with burnt umber or raw umber, and then that will really set off my poppies that are going to be that deep yellow. And I will be going over all of this with my palette knife. So I don't really have to worry about streaks and whether or not the color is just right or anything like that, because it's going to be changed. So I'm just picking up a bit of one color, a little bit of another color, and just kind of throwing it out there. And this feeling can be changed a lot when I come back later with my palette knife. Now as I come down into this area, I'm going to move into some darker violets and purples and things, because like I said, I want that to really set off my poppies. I also am going to have some greenery in here, but I can add that later with the palette knife. I started this earlier this morning. I started this video, and as I worked, the painting became something else, and I'm showing that on the screen right now. I like it, but it actually turned into what I'm calling the Kansas Prairie storm. So I thought about painting over that, just starting over, but the more I looked at it, the more I thought, you know, paintings become what they want to become. And I really like that painting. I would like to finish it by adding several glazes and things, or maybe layers of varnish. So that will be another painting video. Now, to help the spread better and cover better, I'm adding a little bit of the titanium white. And our base coat will peek through when we go back and add the palette knife work. So you can see that basically I have just 3 sections. The eye will kind of interpret that to be sky area. This is ground and things like that back in there. And I may bring the sky down a little bit. I can do that with the palette work. The brain will interpret this as ground. And then I will put my bright colored poppies in there. Okay, now comes the fun part of doing the palette knife work. On my seaside poppy painting, I mostly put down white for the sky. And then I moved into my other colors. I didn't use any white except just in the sky. I don't think I really want to use actual white because that would be really, really too light, but I'll see how it goes. Maybe a kind of a cream. For that I'm using white with a little Titan buff, and there's even a little bit of purple on there, and I just let that go. It doesn't really matter. Now, when you're working with the palette knife, you just go back and forth, pick up a little bit of paint on one side of the knife. I'm working on this side. This side doesn't have any paint. It doesn't matter if it gets a little on it, but this is the side that I'm really working with. And I just kind of dab it in there, and I can pick up a tiny dot of something if I want to. You can see how that looks then when you do that. I don't want too much because this is in the background here where I want it to be lighter. And you just kind of play with it until you get the feeling that you're after. So if you go back and forth and up and down, you get the area pretty well covered. And you can pull a little of one color down into the other, so there's a little bit of an overlap here. I don't want my sky area to just suddenly be dark. We have had more definite stripes when we started, but now we kind of want to move away from that a bit. And your brain will just kind of interpret this to be background. And as I come down into here, I can even add a bit darker. And to get this dark, I'm using Payne's Gray with my purples. Later on, you want the whole thing to kind of blend. So I come down this way, I start kind of converting over. Now I can bring in a little bit more blue here if I want. That adds just a little bit of darkness to that area. So we'll see later what that looks like if I decide that's a little bit too dark. Just one little tiny touch of something like this, see, changes the color, changes the mood of it. And just to brighten this up a little, I can throw a little bit of white in it. Now if I take the ultramarine blue and add a little bit of Payne's Gray, that brings in some blue here, which is kind of pretty. See how that kind of changes things up a bit, but it's not too blue because I have darkened it a bit with the Payne's Gray. And I like that because I like having that spot of blue in there. So there's my green gold and there's my brown. And again, we just kind of overlap into the area that we just did. So it's all about playing with color. As I get down this way, I'm getting darker. And I want a bit of light in here too. That kind of cheers that up a little bit. It's kind of fun working with a palette knife because you kind of do different things than maybe you would normally do. Yeah, so this is kind of balanced with that. If I made that dark too, it would just be lost because there's a lot of darkness in here already. And your eyes notices that this is dark up here, but then there's a balancing piece down here. And then there are different colors along here, and then it kind of comes up this way. So you can kind of enter the painting up through here. There was a piece right here in the middle, an area that I wasn't totally happy with, and so I used my palette knife to just go over it a few more times. So now I feel like it has a lot of depth, and I like the colors. So we'll see how this works. I'll let this totally dry, and then I'll come back and add some poppies. I have quite a bit of light right up in through here, this white, and I have some white down through here to kind of balance that, and I think that will look okay. Again, I'm going to just grab a little bit of each color, maybe even some of this down at the base, my yellow ochre, and the lighter ones out at the tip. And then I'm just going to go ahead and make kind of a large half of a circle here. So when you're doing poppies, you're kind of like doing a frown and then a happy face on the base. And then I'll go back and add, so it's kind of like that. And then I'll go back and add some highlights and things in there. Now this, I can already tell, yellow is not always really good at covering, so I'll probably need a few coats. I perhaps will need to actually let that sit, but that has my first one on there then for me. Now I'm just coming back with my palette knife and filling in some area here. You kind of get a feel for it as you go along here, what might still need something. The palette knife allows you to put down a little thicker paint too, which I like. Now I can see here that it's the same thing sort of happened in my Seaside Poppies painting. I have this little bit of a blank space up here. I have a heavy corner down here. I could have either made this come up higher, but I didn't really want to do that. So I think what I'll end up doing is I'll just add a little bit of darkness to that corner up there. That way the eye is brought into this area. I have let this sit overnight, and I'm very happy with the overall look of the painting. I'm going to go back now and add some highlights. I want to add a bit of detail, just a little bit of detail to the poppies. I still need to add the stems. And in looking at it, I feel like it's a little bit dark, and I'll know more what to do with that when I'm finished with the poppies. But I'm also thinking that I need something up here. And I have a couple of different ways that I can fix that. Now the glazing is done by mixing paint with a glaze medium. And the reason you do that is if you want to add some highlights, but you don't want solid paint to go down, then you can do that by adding a glaze. It's the same as adding water, sort of, as far as the effect goes. You can kind of see through the paint more. But it's not a good idea to add too much water to paint. So in this case, I have my glaze right here, and I have my paint here. That way I can put on what ends up being thin coats, and the color underneath shows through. And many artists will build up to something like a flower with many, many layers of glaze. And for glaze, I use the golden acrylic glazing liquid, and this is gloss. So I'm going to mix up a bit of glaze with my white paint, and I'll just put a little bit down to make sure that I don't have too much. Now see, you can see that if I had actual white paint is what I use for blending because it's so heavy and it's very opaque, and that would be a bit too much here. That's where the glazing comes in really nicely. I can add these little highlights and bring out the flowers without losing my color underneath. And I can even kind of mix them together. I can take a little bit of yellow, a little bit of white, and then the glazing. and bring that out here. Kind of play around with that. So even though the first part is done with the palette knife, you can still go back and add bits of detail. Now I'm going to go in and add a little bit of center in those as well. But I think they're just about to where I want. Like here's a little extra dot, and I'm just leaving that because this is just, it's a little bit abstract and it's okay to have a little spot somewhere. Now for the little buds, I like using this palette knife because you can't be too perfect with it. It's not really meant to be something that's really perfect, and you can just lay it in the paint and then press it down like this, and that gives you a little poppy bud. And I don't want the stems to really stand out. They need to be quite dark to just kind of blend in. So I'm using raw umber. Okay, so now I'm going to put the little centers in, then I'll know for sure where to put the stems. And I'm using the raw umber, and I'm just going to place a few little tiny specks down in here so that the eye tells you that's a flower center in there. All of a sudden there's detail to that flower. It tells your eye that that's the center. We can see now for sure the flower's going that way. And you may have flowers where you can't see the centers, and that works fine too. This one, this piece here comes up high enough that I didn't really want to show too much center, and I don't have a perfectly round center because you're only seeing part of it. This is covering it. This you're kind of looking down in there. Now I know which way they're going, and I can add stems. So since this is kind of going this way, I'll have a stem that kind of flows around like this. So I'll add that one first. And I want to get enough on the edge of the palette that I can make my line, but not too much. Then I just make a quick stroke, kind of like that. And that's enough. That just kind of gives an idea there of a stem. And it just kind of disappears down into there. And as you run out of paint, that kind of automatically happens for you. Now, if I feel like that's not quite enough of a base there, if it's a little bit too thin, it gives me the idea that it's not quite holding up the flower. I can then come back with my brush and add just a tiny bit. Now I'm going to make just a few random lines to add some little buds. And maybe I'll use this edge. I kind of like this short edge. I feel like I have a little more control. And the reason I'm pulling it out like this is I want it to kind of go off down towards the bottom. And the paint runs out, which is perfect. I want it to just kind of fade away down at the bottom. And then I can add a little bud right there. And that's really all I need. And then the same thing over here. And I even got a little bit of yellow on there, and that's okay too. I think that I like that. And now that I've done this, I have enough going on here. I know for sure I don't want anything up there. So what I do need to do then to make this corner feel just a little bit more balanced is I'm going to add a little bit of color up in there that's slightly lighter in tone. So I'm thinking that if I make a nice color of ultramarine blue and Payne's gray and then do a glaze, a little bit of palette knife glaze up there, just a tiny, tiny bit. I'll add just a little bit of lightness up there that the eye will pick up. And I'm going to add white to it as well. I'm going to get the color that I like down here first. So that's kind of a pretty color, but maybe even more white. I'll get the color to what I want. Really quite light, and then add the glaze to it. Because at this point now I'm looking for balance. And I'm not going by any specific rule of painting. I just know that to my eye it's not quite right still. I just need a little bit of lightness up in there. So now I'm going to let that sit and dry, and then I'll think about it. So this sort of meanders up this way, and it's darker in through there, so it helps these stand out. And then this is a certain area that's kind of by itself in color, and that balances with this down here. And this is a heavy corner, but this has some tone up in there that I think balances it, but I won't know for sure until it's all dry. So this shows you, between watching the Seaside Poppies video and this video, how you can use the same types of techniques and get a completely different look. After letting this dry and looking at it for a little while, I decided it needed just a few final touch-ups. There was a white streak right down here, which I removed by adding just a tiny bit of green gold paint. And then I added one more little bud on this side. And then I came through and highlighted the little buds just ever so slightly. I didn't want them to really stand out, but I didn't want them to be completely faded away into the background either. So I think that's a nice effect now. And to me, this is all overall balanced. And the eye goes right to the poppies, which is where I want them to go, especially this one. So after this now thoroughly dries, I will go back and add my Liquitex gloss medium and varnish. That'll add a UV protection, and it also protects the surface from damage and things. I don't always varnish my paintings, but some of them I do, and I think this one would look nice with the gloss varnish. And for that I use my Liquitex 2-inch brush, and I just dip it in the varnish, and then I add a coat. You can add 1 coat or 2 coats, or as I said, you don't have to add any varnish. Thank you for watching my video, and please remember to subscribe.